Hi everyone, I'm so excited to have you here on my channel today. Thank you so much for joining me. We are going to look at so many embossing folder ideas. I think that your mind is going to be blown with how many I've come up with. What I did is compiled all my videos from 2024 that talk about embossing folders, and I looked at what the most popular techniques are, and we're going to kind of do a countdown. A couple things I want you to notice in this video. We have beginner and advanced things. And if it seems like it's going too fast through those topics, just know that there will be some classes coming out soon, my first set of classes, that will address all of these things and even more with embossing folders. So stay tuned for that. Make sure if you hadn't done it yet, you hit the like and subscribe, and let me blow your mind with this video.
Okay, let's start with the most basic use of an embossing folder. I have embossed this piece of paper. It's white. I'm not going to do another thing to it. I have two sides that I could use on a card, and it's the perfect background for beautiful flowers and just anything you want to pop out, but you want that background to have just a little extra special. Here are a couple examples of just plain white with embossing folders. This is so fun. You don't have to limit it to white. Look at how beautiful it looks when you're using a more metallic paper. This is kind of a shiny blue paper, and look at how beautiful that background is. Let me show you how this highlights beautiful flowers or design elements. So try out some of those specialty papers and use them as your backdrop. This navy looks so amazing with this coral flower. I'll show you the final part of this card so that you can see, but just stretch yourself. I also really love it on black, and this is one of my favorite embossing folders of the year. It's called Tufted Elegance. Before we move to the second technique, look at it on gray paper. I partially did this paper and then used a fun sentiment at the bottom. So you can create so many things. Our next technique is going to look at ink blending and swiping over the raised areas of the embossing folder. Now, you'll notice on this one, I used the debossed side. And when I'm talking debossed, I mean that it's pressed down into the paper versus popping up off the paper. And there's several techniques that this works a little bit better for. For this specific card, I picked a purple cardstock, and the reason I picked cardstock and I'm blending over it is because I want to create a focal point on this beautiful flower, and I'm going to leave some of it a little bit lighter, and then we're going to swipe over the areas that stand up, and it's going to give it so much detail. So I'm kind of coming in with coordinating colors and just adding a little darker around this piece of paper so that I can get that cool highlight effect. Once I get my purple to where I want it to, I'm going to start adding some black. And I used a little sponge dauber for this, just to kind of go right along those edges and get them darker. But what I also did was use, and I rarely use a sponge dauber on a card. I tend to go for the brushes more, and this would probably work with that. But what I wanted to do was to be able to touch the little areas of the veining and the flower petals with this black and create some dimension and just some obvious lines. Okay, so you can kind of see how the flower is evolving, and adding that black on the veining and the petals makes this little rose stand out so nicely. I'm going to continue to ink blend because, like most of us, I am experimenting as I go and just trying new things, and I decided I wanted a very dramatic card. So let me show you what else I added, because I added a wow factor that looks so cool but is so easy to do. You have got to try it. So let me show you what I did. So the sponge dauber seems to be working well, so I decided after I do some of the black, I'm also going to add a little bit of the dark purple around here and just give it even more definition, and it works really nicely. But here is the most amazing thing. Taking a gold ink pad, I'm using Altenews Antique Gold, and just kind of rubbing it across those raised areas to give a nice gold effect. And I'm going to highlight this by also adding a little bit of gold splatter on the card. So I use this pan all the time, and I can't believe I still have so much gold left because I use this for my gold splatters all the time. So I'm going to add a few gold splatters, and then I'm going to show you up close. I know this is more of a subtle gold effect. You could get a brighter gold if you used a pen or if you used embossing powder, but I love how subtle it is. It just really looks beautiful. So here's the final card, and then let me show you using a different colored background how this works for another card. Now, this is an embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp, and I love it because it's geometric. And if you know me, you know I love masculine cards, and this is a great one for that. So I used a teal colored background, and then I'm going to swipe that same Altenew antique gold on it, and I'm going to show you how much it shows up on this card. It looks really good. A key to doing ink swiping is making sure you have a good stationary piece of paper. I use the Altenew Grip Mat, and that has been a lifesaver because you're barely touching the top of this raised area. So on this one, the design is raised up. And so I'm just going along. I can feel as it's raised, and I'm adding that beautiful gold shine to it. Now let me show you this up close. You see that shine? It's so beautiful and so easy. And I'll show you some final cards so you can kind of see how that looks. But just easy swiping and ink blending can really make a difference on your cards. And you really should get yourself some gold pigment ink. Our next technique is heat embossing with embossing folders. And as I told you earlier, we're kind of doing a countdown. So we're going from least to most popular in my videos that people love the technique. So you can always go through the chapters if you want and pick techniques you want to look at. I will make sure to put that for you. This is an interesting embossing folder. I haven't seen anything else like it. It's another Altenew folder, and it's got a wedding. I guess it could be used for all kinds of things, but it looks like a wedding dress with the man and woman. And so this is a different type of folder. Okay, so this plate doesn't cover the whole page, which makes it a little different than some other ones. So we're going to have some empty white space. I decided to start experimenting with heat embossing and embossing folders with this card. And so what I decided to do was use my ink, and I'm on the side that's debossed, so the image is pressed down. But what's going to happen is how I'm going to place my paper, I'm going to get this embossing ink and the image will be raised. So remember, how you put your paper in makes a difference. But I've been messy with this, and I have put that embossing ink kind of all over, trying not to squish it down to every little detail, but trying to get it in there. I used anti-static powder on the paper, and then I'm going to send it through my die cutting machine, and let me show you how it works. So if you like everything to be in the lines and perfect, this card is not going to be for you. If you like the kind of like ethereal look, I felt like for a wedding, this would be just so nice, and it matches most everybody's colors, is to have some type of metallic in this kind of off-white paper. So you'll see here that I'm spreading it, and of course the embossing is getting on to the raised image because we have put some ink on that. But also I went off of the image, remember, and put some ink kind of around it, and that makes it, the embossing powder, go out to the sides and almost be like a shadow on this, and I just think it makes it glow. So let me show you what it looks like once we've heated it up. Now, if that shadow's too big for you, you can always take a little brush and just rub off any excess. So I did rub off a couple of areas that I thought were just kind of not the right shape or just got a little pointy, and just moved some of that powder off before I started heating. And then once it's heated, it's nice and shiny and platinum. I'm going to compare this card and another card that I did that are the same embossing folder with different ways to emboss. So I'll show you final pictures in just a second. On the comparison card, I am using that embossing ink, and I'm pressing it onto the image that is raised. Now, I'm not being super careful with it. I feel like it's not, just do your best not to press it into the other part. But if you get a mistake, you can always use a brush to clean it up. So now this image will get pressed in. So our image will be down into the paper, and let me show you the difference in what this looks like. So that's how it looks, nice and in there. And then we've got our embossing ink is inside the image, okay? Because that's how we added it. I hope that makes sense for you. So now I'm going to use the embossing ink, fill it in, and then let me show you the comparison in these two cards based on the way we did them. One has that beautiful shadow, and we inked the opposite side of the embossing folder. This one is going to be more clear cut and crisp. Okay, so look at this beautiful shine. It's so beautiful, and I'll show you the comparison of the two cards right now. Our messy shadow one, and then look at the clean cut one that we pressed into the paper. Definitely different looks and cool ways to use embossing. Now, the last way to use embossing that I've experimented with my folders is one that's really fun. It is a little bit more time consuming, but what it basically is using a pen. So there are embossing pens to trace the lines of an embossing folder. So I'm going to speed this up and show you how I did it, and then show you what kind of look it gives. Now, the thing about embossing ink is it stays wet for a long time, but I'm going to do this card in sections so that I don't risk it drying out because I am tracing these lines. Now, the easiest way to do this is if you've impressed or debossed the image into this so that you can put your pen and follow in that little indented line. So you see those lines are down, not raised up, so they're super easy to follow. And then you can continue to trace whatever you want. Now, this one had a lot on it, but you could pick a folder that has less lines and still trace them to create this amazing look with polished silver embossing powder. You could use any color, but I just love how the silver shows up on that ink blended background. So cute. Okay, we're about to hop into another technique, but look at how these turned out. Isn't that the cutest thing? I know it took some work to trace that, but it looks so cute. So next we're gonna look at embossing over stenciled images, okay? So I've used some masking and created an image, and then I'm going to add an embossing folder over it, and it gives such a cool focal point. So I love using this technique when I have a really intricate pattern. So look at how many flowers there are. I was a little overwhelmed with thinking I was going to need to color some way all of those flowers. And so what I decided to do was just to keep it pretty simple and create this pattern with the beautiful flowers all around. Now, if you have any cracking or you just want to make your image a little bit darker, you can come in with some ink blending over this. Just try to stay in your little area right here so that you don't get outside the lines, but you can easily cover up any mistakes or add a little bit of dimension with your teeny tiny ink blending brushes if you're quite careful. These two cards just used masked shapes, but what if we use an actual stencil? Let me show you what it looks like and how much detail it brings to an amazing stenciled image. I really like using an embossing folder with this geometric design with something super floral. I just think that the contrast in the two looks really cool. So be brave, stencil your image, and try embossing over it. Remember, there's a million ways to fix it if you accidentally crack the paper. We got that. No worries. We can fix that with a little bit of ink blending. But just if you know your sandwich, make sure that you try this out because it is so fun. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, I'm trying to pop up the videos that are longer explanations of each of these card techniques, and I will also include those in the description. We're getting about to the halfway point of our video and about to start technique number 5. Remember, we're counting down, so the best is yet to come, so hang in there. Make sure that you've hit the subscribe and like, and let's get to technique number 5. Now, you've probably heard of the blackout technique, but I'm going to take you through the basics and I'm going to add a little extra advanced level blackout technique with something that you probably haven't thought of before. We're going to use embossing powder in a unique way to create this card. We're using the embossing folder Cupped Blossoms from Altenew this time, and we're using Catherine Pooler inks. For the blackout technique, you're laying down color and you're kind of being approximate with it. I'm going to use this folder to kind of help me know where my flowers are so that I can create colors. But you're basically being very loose with your coloring. And if you're going outside of the lines, no worries because we're going to cover that up with the blackout. And for this card, we're actually going to be using navy instead of black. But I use my embossing folder over the piece of paper to kind of help me with color matching. So I'm creating a little bit of dimension in my flowers by creating two-tone colors. So I'm using Catherine Pooler inks in a lighter and then a darker color along the outside. And I just think this gives the card even more excitement. So just use your embossing folder, kind of continue to put the pattern over the top, and you'll be able to do all of your colors and fit them where they're going to be on the embossing folder. Let me show you. So I'm adding some yellows and oranges, and you can see I'm making sure that fits about where those are. And then I'm even going to add green for the leaves. So I'll have to be a little bit more careful with the green. But once, like I said, if it fades into a flower or something, it's going to be okay. But you'll see how I do it here. Also, this has a complete video on this technique and the specific card. So I'll make sure I pop that up for you. And I'll also have it in the description. So if you want to go look at this technique a little bit further as we're getting more complicated in our techniques, I will try to make sure that I put out there everything that you need to go find even more information on these embossing folders. Okay, I've got my colors ready. I've impressed the image into it, so people often refer to that as debossed. The reason is I'm going to color the background with this beautiful navy. It is from VersaFine Clair. This is a great ink to do this with, something that's very solid, and then you're going to swipe it over your image. I know it's scary, but just remember, we're coloring it. It's almost like we've done our image on navy paper, and look at the detail. It does not have to be perfect, but man, it looks amazing. So what you want to do is just continue to keep your ink pad very flat. You want your paper secured. That's why I'm using this amazing grip mat again. You've seen this multiple times in my videos. Highly recommend. It'll be on my favorite products of the year list. And I'm adding this navy blue, and I'm just going to continue adding it until I feel like I've gotten it dark enough. You see how my color goes into the navy up there? I'm going to add a few layers just to kind of cover up any colors that went outside the lines. Now, you could leave your card just like this, but I wanted to go the extra mile and do a little something advanced. And what I'm going to do is use my embossing pen again. Now, if you don't have an embossing pen, you could paint on some embossing ink. You could do all kinds of different things. But what I forgot to do was go ahead and add my powder. So I'm going to add the powder. Then I'm going to use my embossing pen. And I'm just going to kind of trace the areas of the petals. So let me show you. Now, just like any pen, anywhere that I put this, so I'm trying to kind of follow the leaves of the petal and just add some extra dimension in these open areas. And I'm doing it swiping, kind of like petal veining. And the reason I'm doing that is just it's going to show beautiful detail in that area. So you could just color parts in that you want, but I tend to go like I was coloring this image with Copics. I'm going to add some veining to the open areas, and let's look at what it looks like once you put the powder on. And I'm going to take it even a step up and use colored embossing powder. This is a orange embossing powder with some nice glittery effects to it. And let me just show you kind of where those areas are. You see that it's going to have some areas of extra beautiful orange. It's going to look so good. I'll heat it up with all the colors and show you the difference. I end up using 4 different colors of embossing powder. Now, when you're using this many colors, you probably want to heat in between colors just to keep them from mixing, but it looks so good. This is actually a set of embossing powders that are made to go together. They're called a quad. Sometimes they do trios and quads at Wow Embossing, and this one is a quad. So that is actually how I picked the colors for this card, is I knew that I wanted to use this embossing powder, sorry. Here's that full card. And now we're going to one of the more popular techniques this year, and that is about using vellum. One of my most popular videos of the year is this video. I still have another technique that's even more popular than this. So this is number 6. And what I'm going to do is die cut vellum. So if you don't know what vellum paper is, it's kind of a plasticky type paper, but it's very fragile. So you do need to be careful with it. So with heavy cardstock, if you've been putting a lot more pressure on your embossing folders, if you could remove one of those layers, sometimes that makes it a little easier on you with the vellum because it is such a delicate paper. It doesn't take much to emboss it. And you want to make sure you've got a good vellum. This vellum right here is Hero Arts vellum, and it's a nice sturdy one that I like. I will be testing vellum soon to kind of decide which one I think is the best for embossing. But so far, this is the top of my list, and I've tried several. So to me, this looks like lace, and you could just put it behind a die cut. You could have it as the main focal point of your card. It would be great. But let's step it up a notch. Here is something that I have discovered that is amazing. This is lunar paste. Lunar paste is a very plasticky paste, and you could try this with other things, but you're going to need something that doesn't need to absorb. This lunar paste almost becomes its own like plastic. It's kind of a hard to explain, but it's a different material than most of my other pastes, and it works excellent on this technique. So I'm taking a gold lunar paste. I put gloves on. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can use it with your fingers. I just was trying to keep myself from making a huge mess. And then I'm rubbing it over the raised areas of this impression. And remember, this is a 3D embossing folder, so some areas are going to be darker than others because they stick up a little bit higher. So I'm just going along and adding this. Once I've covered the entire heart, we'll let it dry for a little bit, and then you will see how impressive this is. Check out that gorgeous shine. And of course, there's a full video on YouTube about this process, but let me show you the final card. I got so excited on this final card with that lunar paste. I was loving it so much that I even went around the edges of the colored cardstock, and then I went around the edges of the leaves just to kind of like bring it all together. And I was so impressed at how this turned out. It's one of those like just you're experimenting and you find something that really works. So you can see the full tutorial online, but let me show you how to even step this up a little bit. Did you know you could add color to your vellum as well? So in this card, I'm kind of creating a monochromatic card. It's going to have some gold accents, and we're going to do some of that lunar paste. But what I'm going to do is not start from a white background. I'm going to add Catherine Pooler ink in this beautiful teal, and I'm going to add it to this background. And you usually need, because this isn't as it doesn't like absorb the ink as much. You do need to let it dry a little bit, but I didn't have any trouble with this ink rubbing off on me at all. So once I have it all blended, it just looks like I have a textured piece of vellum that matches the background perfectly. So I am going to step this up with the lunar paste as well, and I'll show you how it looks over something colored, but it really makes this card look pretty cool. So now I have this perfectly coordinated card, and I'm going to use a little bit of paste. This is actually a different paste. This one's from Picket Fence Studios instead of the lunar paste, and it worked perfect too. You know, I'm always experimenting with what works, and this one worked well. It's a little bit lighter gold than the previous one, but man, does it sparkle. I'm going to try to tilt this so that you can see what color it is because it is beautiful. Okay, let me just do a little flyover here so that you can get the effect of this card. I just think it looks so good. I really like that. And now we're ready for our next technique. So the next technique is using watercolor with your embossing folders. So any type of pattern works. You do need to be cautious about how much water you use. If you overdo it and flatten out your design a little bit, then you can always send it back through the embossing folder. But I just use minimal water and create these designs. So I started out with some blue in the side of the circles, but I wanted to take it a step further. And so I'm going to use a pretty concentrated gold metallic watercolor on the raised part of this. Now, this is definitely a labor of love creating this card, but it looks so beautiful. And my YouTube channel does have a full tutorial of this, so I'll make sure to link that for you. It's amazing how much shine you can get out of that metallic watercolor. So we are ready for the next technique. This is technique number 8. It is hugely popular on my YouTube channel, and it's using metallic paper with embossing folders. Now, you can get some amazing designs doing this. You do need to decide how you're going to use it because metallic paper can be a little bit overwhelming if it is the entire card. So I'm going to show you a way that I used it where you still get to see this amazing texture, but you're not overwhelmed with just one bright metallic card. You can do this with any metallic paper. This one has a little bit of variance in its color, which is really nice to kind of give it even more interest. And this folder is from Simon Says Stamp. It's a poinsettia folder, and I love it. Look how I did the final card. I covered up part of it just so that it wasn't all solid red, and to kind of bring out that sentiment, I did add a few little jewels, which are hard to see because they are the exact color of the background, but they look so pretty, and I just really love how it turned out. Look at how beautiful this card is. Oh, I just love how it turned out. Okay, so the next technique, number 9, coloring embossing folder images. We've got some simple ways to do this and some more complicated. I'm going to take it real advanced on part of this, but right now the simple way is to use stencils. Some companies like Altenew make this stencils that go with the images. You can color before, then put it through the embossing folder, or you can color after. I am partial to coloring after just because of lining it up, but it does not matter. It's up to your preference. So it just turns out a beautiful image. It's raised, but it's also colored in. It looks beautiful. Now let's go with a little bit more complicated. I'm starting out with a white piece of cardstock, and this is going to become the most colorful, amazing piece. And we're going to not only color, we're going to add some heat embossing to enhance the color. It's going to be beautiful. So I'm going to color this piece with Copic markers, and we're going to use ink blending. We're going to use some heat embossing. I'm going to be doing what looks like messy coloring. I'm going to take a very dark color on one side of each balloon and then a very light color on the other side. And that's because I'm trying to create that reflective where the light is on a balloon. And I know that I'm going to cover up this coloring with some heat embossing. The heat embossing is transparent, so you will be able to see some of that, but it's going to cover a multitude of mistakes. So here's how it looks colored. Now we're going to add those extra details by adding some heat embossing, and it's going to transform this piece. It's amazing. Now, if you haven't seen this tool, it looks like nail polish, but it's actually embossing ink with a brush, kind of like a nail polish brush. And it allows you, if I was going to have to color this in with a pen, it would take forever. And this is a nice way to just paint on embossing ink and add some extra layers. So this, like I said, is a work of, this is another labor of love, this card is. But when you see the final result, you're going to really understand why I did that. So I'm trying it out here and covering the entire balloon with the embossing ink. Once I have it completely filled in, I'm going to add the embossing powder. Please check your embossing powder over your markers in a test, because you want to make sure that you can see that the color turns out the way that you want it to. So I'm adding this, and this is kind of a blue hinted embossing powder with lots of texture. Let me show you what it looks like once it's heated up. It just gives the balloons texture, sparkle. It looks so beautiful. Let me show you the final panel. This is what the final panel looks like, but I decided, since it's heat embossed, we're not going to smear any ink, and I decided I wanted the background of this to be blue. So I did do some ink blending to create a blue background like these were in the sky, and that ink does pick up more on the strings of the balloon. So let me show you the final project. So once I got this to the blue that I was wanting, I added a sentiment, and look at how gorgeous this card is. It is almost indescribable when you see it up close. It just is so impressive and so fun. I wish you could all see it in person. That brings us to our last technique. This is embossing images, and I'll tell you what I mean about that. Some embossing folders come with die cuts. Others, you could cut out the images that are already there. But what we're going to start with is a cutout, and then we are going to emboss it in this metallic paper, making our own, almost like our own die cut that has all of these amazing lines on it. So I'm going to do 2 flowers so that I have the poinsettia flower and I have something that I can use as leaves. And this card turned out to be one of the most popular of the year. So let me show you. So selectively using areas on your embossing folder can really create some cool things. And you can cut these shapes out yourself. You could already emboss the whole page and then cut areas out to use for these beautiful leaves. Look at how this looked layered together. Absolutely gorgeous. One of my favorite cards. I had so much fun with that one. Okay, let me show you on a smaller item how this can work as well. We'll take one quick look at that card, and then look at this really small embossing pattern and these butterflies. Look, they have little hearts on them. So you can create a lot of dimension with just that simple step. Let me pop back in here and talk to you more about all these techniques. I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, crafty friends. Now tell me, you had to have found a new way to use embossing folders in there. I want to hear which one you want to try and which one was your favorite from the video. Make sure you let me know in the comments below. You can also find the links to all the supplies there in the description. And if you'll notice, there were a few embossing folders that I used multiple times. These are in my top favorite crafty things. I'm going to come out with a couple of videos in the next month or so with some of the suggestions if you're thinking about using that Christmas money to buy any new embossing folders. I will say the #1 most used embossing folder this year was the All-To-New Tufted Elegance. You saw that in the first part of the video. It's a great background, it's a really easy one to use, and it's a pretty simple folder. So that is one, if you're getting started, to make sure you try out. All the others are great, and you saw some of them repeated there because I do love them so much. So I will link everything else in the description. Make sure that you're staying tuned on my channel. Hit the subscribe button so that you see my videos. I don't want to get lost in YouTube land and never see you again. And also, know that I'm coming out with some classes, and I'm going to be part of 2 different card making summits. One is in January and one is in March. So make sure you stay tuned to be kept up to date on everything happening at Nikki Hearts Cards. You really should join my newsletter. I will not overwhelm your inbox, but you will hear about classes and exclusive giveaways and all these things first. So I'll make sure that link is below for you as well. I hope that you have a great day and that you enjoy the video.